to come this morning. And as you know, we have two candidates standing to be our representative for the voluntary sector on the Health and Wellbeing Board. And you both of them have sent out a written statement saying why they think they're the right person. So now we're going to start with Marianne having 5 minutes to speak to what you've written, and then we'll have Jason, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers afterwards. Is that okay?
It's can I just say that's fine. I didn't know I was speaking to what I was written, or I had 5 minutes. So I've got some thoughts that probably match what I've written that I'll just talk through, and stop me if I go too long. Is that okay?
Okay, I'll get my watch out. Yep. Okay, go.
So obviously everybody here knows me. And I'm going to just go through 3 points, I think, which really kind of outline why I think I'd be a good candidate for this role. Firstly, I think it's time it might be time for a new pair of eyes and ears, time for a change in this role. I think Jason's done really sterling work for several years now. But I do think there is value to a diversity of voices and experience and views. And the other thing is, I wonder, I hope that WCA, as we were talking about just now, will mean that Jason retains a seat on various boards. Whereas I think that actually one organisation having the seat on all the boards is possibly not good for the sector. So hopefully Jason and I will both have different seats on different boards if I won, and I think that would be a great outcome. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to stand. Secondly, I'm personally really committed to social justice, to reducing inequalities and to a preventative approach. And in this context, I think the Health and Wellbeing Board and its role is really, really important, because it's a body that brings together agencies, and together I think we're much stronger, and and a better force to reduce health inequalities. And obviously the voluntary and community sector is really key to this. And I've been in the sector pretty much my whole life, and working in Wandsworth for the past 9 years, and I know just how good the whole sector is at addressing the wider determinants of health. And obviously I'm very clear about how our organisation does that, but I love going out and about, as we were talking about earlier, and hearing about the singing groups and the boxing clubs and the bereavement services and the food banks. And of course, they all address the wider determinants of health. And I'm absolutely committed to getting the voices, the really wide and diverse voices from the sector heard, and would want to both inform and shape the Health and Wellbeing Board agenda. Personally, I'm not afraid of asking questions, and also I know how much there is to learn. I see attending the forums, meetings, and staying updated that are part of this role as also part of my chief executive role. So I think there'd be the two bits of my job would work well together. So the third thing that I wanted to touch on was how my role as Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Wandsworth gives me really relevant experience of operating at a senior level, but it also gives me really good and relevant intelligence. I'm so fortunate to lead a relatively well-resourced organisation that delivers services across the borough. We help 13,000 people a year, residents a year, and this gives us a really good understanding of local need. We also have connections with partners across the borough, which gives us that real understanding of the strength of the network and the diversity of the network. In particular, we host ReferNet, an online referral platform which has got 40 local organisations, and also host various conferences and events, and conduct research reports, which we write up, which really looks in depth at the experiences of the communities and the organisations across the borough. My board is really supportive of my involvement in the Health and Wellbeing Board, and see it as a way in which the organisation pays back and has the opportunity to influence strategy and lead to improvements for all residents, which could reduce demand for our services. Finally, I wanted to say that it's a really exciting time in locally with the new council administration and with the new health systems, really listening differently. We have got an extraordinary voluntary and community sector in this borough, and we've got so much to contribute. And I think this now, at this time of change, it's a real key chance for us to become an equal voice, to be heard and involved as never before. And I think it's this timing and this opportunity that I'd really like to be part of.
Brilliant, thank you. And I didn't even have to wave my finger time-wise. So thank you very much for that, Miriam. Great. Okay, Jason, straight on to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, like Marianne, I wasn't aware that I was giving a 5-minute talk to what I've written down either. So here I go. So I'm the existing representative for the voluntary sector, elected representative for the voluntary sector on the Health and Wellbeing Board. I've been doing that for a few years now, as Marianne alluded to. I think what I bring there is the experience that I understand what the Health and Wellbeing Board is and how it works, and how I can influence it in terms of the voluntary sector, both with sometimes points from individual voluntary sector organisations about specific issues, and about giving a sense of broader voluntary sector perspectives on things. And sometimes there is more than one voluntary perspective on things, which needs to be communicated and understood by the Health and Wellbeing Board. The voluntary sector are much unlike all the other organisations on there, which are usually representative of a single body organisation, and therefore there's a single line of governance and a single, if you like, line of command. But the voluntary sector is diverse, as Marianne has put it out, and quite different. And there are different elements within the voluntary sector. Some are very business-like and organised, and some are very, very visceral and pulled together just out of passion, and don't necessarily even consider themselves to be an organisation. So I think it's getting those points across, and I've worked hard to do that. I've also worked hard to build. I think one of the things we need to do and continue to do is being influential on the Health and Wellbeing Board is also about making sure that you develop relationships and rapport with other people on the Health and Wellbeing Board, so that when you speak, they will listen, because they know who you are and what you're saying. And I've tried to develop that. So I think the other thing I wanted to point out is, as I mentioned in my speech, is, I'll say again, I said before the meeting started, that in many boroughs, in most boroughs actually, I don't know of any others that are not, you know, we are an outlier. This is an elected representative position, which is fantastic, you know, that we have that choice, and then I'll come back to that in a moment. But in many boroughs, it is incumbent on the chief executive of the infrastructure organisation or their delegated representative to represent the voluntary sector at the Health and Wellbeing Board. And for that matter, I think, you know, it would be negligent of me if I didn't offer myself to this role, whether I get it or not, because WCA is the organisation which is involved with the support and coordination and connection with its gaze at the voluntary sector and you know, at the community at large. We're not a frontline service provider, so we don't have any vested interest in any delivery projects or anything like that. Of course, Marianne gives a different perspective to me on that, because Citizens Advice is a frontline provider and can give insight into what's going on with direct line from service users that I could never do. However, the gaze of this particular role is about that of the voluntary sector and how it relates to the Health and Wellbeing Board and the borough in terms of a system partner. And I think Marianne and I both agree that I think this is we're in times of change, and this is a fantastic opportunity for the voluntary sector at large to be more respected and more integrated into the broader delivery system, and it actually mandated in the ICS paperwork. So I think that's a really important thing. However, the Health and Wellbeing Board is not the ICS, and although how it will relate to the ICS, integrated care system, in the future has yet to be developed and yet to evolve, and that will still take some time. And so at the moment, they're still two quite different things with two quite distinct governance structures and lines of reporting. But at the end of the day, I mean, I will pledge to continue to do what I have done. And I think really it boils down to a very, very simple choice. I mean, there's benefits of keeping me. I mean, I am the chief executive of WCA, all the connections I have with the other infrastructure organisations, the solidarity and pincer movements that we can make collectively across the Southwest London patch, as well as at borough level, is an advantage. At the same time, sorry, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Time. No, finish your sentence.
Okay, I was going to say, I think boils down to a simple choice for people. I mean, I think I've developed respect as an established member of the board representing the voluntary sector. If the sector wants to try somebody different, the choice is simple. It's Marianne. If you want the continuity, the choice is me.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. You did a very good job in the time now. I'm sorry, I didn't realise you didn't know you were. we set this up for this to happen, so don't know where that went wrong. But June, hello.
We sent out an email a little bit earlier this morning with the running order, but I think perhaps we hadn't got it before that.
Oh, right, because the rest of us did. I mean, we were notified. Anyway, June, hello. Welcome. I'm really sorry, but you've missed it.
Oh.
No, because we obviously you can see the turnout isn't amazing. There are now 3 of you, other than the people who work for the organisation and myself chairing, and the 2 candidates. And what we've done is just heard both Marianne and Jason speak to what they'd already sent round in writing and give us a bit more sense of why they're interested and think they're the right person. That's been recorded, so you will be able to see it, see what you've just missed. And I'm sorry, because I think we're not going to go back over what we've had. But if you can we're now going to have a little bit of an open Q&A session, just to get any more information that people who've bothered to come or been able to come this morning would like to get out of this.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll listen to recording. I'm sure I know both of them anyway, but it's
yeah.
I just wanted to sort of like see what other people were thinking, or the way that other people were thinking about the actual election.
Okay. Does everybody know each other? I'm presuming you all do.
Yeah.
Lilias, do you know June?
Yes.
I know, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so, well, basically it's open to the floor, so to speak. We've had the opportunity to listen to them both, so I'm just going to open it up really for people to probe or do what people do at Hustings, which is generally ask questions. Saida, yeah.
Yes. So my question really, I mean, I also know the 2 candidates very well. One of the reasons why I came today was to ask this question, and I think the fact that there's only 3 people representing the voluntary sector is very much part of my question, which is really for both candidates, which is given that, you know, people in the voluntary sector don't seem to be interested and involved in this, in what's happening at the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I actually went to I think it's like a pre-meeting or something that Jason does, because Lilias couldn't make it, so I went on her behalf. And I was actually very surprised because there was hardly anybody there. And what I learned from that was that people were not coming to Jason and saying, you know, this is what we think, or, you know, in other words, Jason didn't have the voice of the sector that he's representing. So what I really want to know is, going forward, do you both think that's important, and how are you going to make sure you get the voice of the sector?
Who'd like, Marianne, do you want to go first? We'll keep in that order, if that's okay.
Saida, it's a great question, and it's the one that I've been thinking about as I was thinking about standing, because I agree those meetings, I mean, I would hope that even if I won, that WCA would keep hosting those meetings, but then I was thinking, is there a value to those meetings? And the other problem is that the papers come out a very short time, so there's not actually time to do any real consultation with the sector. I haven't got a clear answer to you on how we would get the sector's views on specific items that are coming up. But I think what we need to do, and certainly what I do generally, is listen to the sector as a whole through various forums. And so you might not be reading, might not be asking people for their views on, I don't know, hospital discharge, some very specific programme, but you'll be hearing what's going on in the sector, what the views are through relevant conversations, and then feeding that back. That's, I think, how it should probably work. And yeah, because it's not the minutiae. It's what we can provide and what we're hearing as a sector that I think is and what we can offer. And I think if there are very specific papers that come up which are really relevant, so something about learning difficulties, then we know the organisations, particularly WCA, will know the organisations that will have an opinion on and invested in working with people with learning difficulties. And so I think there's something also about targeting. So rather than expecting people to come to a meeting to give feedback, thinking, okay, where do I go to find the answer to this? Where do I go to get local intelligence so that I can give an informed opinion? And I think that's a real responsibility for whoever takes this, is to be proactively looking out. And the final thing I'd say is, I think you were saying this earlier, Saida, about people's lack of engagement. And I think it's a difficult board to understand. I think it doesn't really have teeth. So it's quite strategic, it's quite high level. And I think rather than trying to explain it, I think making it kind of the fact is it exists as an entity understood, and some sort of feeling about just making how it works accessible at a top level rather than going into the detail, and making sure the community know who the representative is to come and speak to. Sorry, that was longer than I planned.
No, thank you though. Jason?
Okay, so I'll take the last part of Saida's point first, and then I'll come back to the bit about the engagement meeting. So from my personal perspective, I don't think it matters whether every little organisation in the borough cares about the Health and Wellbeing Board or not. What my job is to do is to make sure that the Health and Wellbeing Board cares about the voluntary sector. So and to make sure that the sense check from the voluntary sector, or from particular parts of the voluntary sector, especially if it's small organisations who aren't on the radar of anybody in the local authority, for example, are still in the minds of people on the Health and Wellbeing Board when decisions are being made. And I think one of the ways, similar to Marianne, really, when the way I get a lot of that is through my organisation. WCA is an organisation which is very connected with the voluntary sector. We've got a few hundred members on our databases, both in the voluntary sector, both through Healthwatch and through the Voluntary Sector Coordination Service. And that so I get intel and a sense check of what's coming from those. I have many meetings with people in the voluntary sector and at different levels for different reasons, and that all helps add colour and intelligence to when I go to the Health and Wellbeing Board and when I talk about and about giving those general perspectives and sentiments sometimes from the voluntary sector. And I think sometimes it's, as well, that's like I said, sometimes there's not one united voice in the voluntary sector. Sometimes there are diverging points of view. And I think sometimes it's important to remind the Health and Wellbeing Board that's the case, and that the voluntary sector isn't one homogeneous entity. I think in coming back to Saeeda's first point about the Health and Wellbeing Board engagement group, it is very frustrating that the papers get released so late, and I've raised this on a few occasions. Unfortunately, it's not a political issue and not something that anybody really can do much about. I think there are ways that can be mitigated. It's going to take some change. The Health and Wellbeing Board engagement group will continue to exist as long as it's viable and as long as the person wants it to exist, whether it's me or anybody else. It's not something that's done for me as a person, it's done as part of the engagement process. So that will exist, Marianne, irrespective of whether you or I are the elected representative, unless we find a better way. I do think that there is potential for a better way. I mean, we will never know what's on the agenda until a few days in advance. Nobody does, except for the Health and Wellbeing Board executive, which is the chair and the other two officers who set the agenda about a week before that. But that's it, and we don't get it any later than anybody else. So I think, but what we do know is throughout the year, there are going to be certain things that come up or are scheduled to come to the Health and Wellbeing Board. And those are things which we can have perhaps earlier discussion about. I also think it's not just about the engagement group not working well. Part of the reason it struggles to work sometimes is because we don't get context. We don't get proper representation from the council officers coming, giving context to the papers which are at the Health and Wellbeing Board on that particular occasion. We used to have that to a degree when Priya was in post supporting the Health and Wellbeing Board, but we haven't had that since, and that is a frustration, and that has been relayed to the council by me as elected representative and by WCA as the infrastructure organisation. So that's something which can be addressed. But I do think having something like the engagement group, so something where it's been very useful to me, is when there are particular points on the agenda and particular organisations have particular commentary or particular things that actually need to be represented because they might be experts in that particular area, or they might have in-depth knowledge, or they might have a view which is not of the voluntary sector at all, but it's from the voluntary sector, and that's extremely useful intelligence. And I've used that as a tool on many occasions to say that there are things in the voluntary sector that have questioned A, B, or C.
Yes, thanks, Jason. And I mean, I totally agree with what you've been saying, and I do know that those of us who've been going to the preparatory meetings, have always been asking Jason on our behalf to say this timescale is ridiculous, and if they're genuine about consultation, which, you know, in theory the rhetoric is that they are, they should make the timescales work appropriately, because otherwise it's a farce. I'm hopeful that maybe in this new version of it, with the new chair and so on, they might be open to looking at whether they're genuinely wanting consultation with the sector and enabling that to happen by changing the timescales for the papers and the agenda setting and so on. So I think that's a battle still to be continued to be fought, but I know Jason has tried to fight it previously. Okay, so anyone else like to ask something?
Yeah,
Lilias?
yes. Do you, the two, I know the two of you very well, but just to continue the discussion a bit more, do you think there is a role for the Health and Wellbeing Board in the new system, or does the new system have a place where the kind of things that the Health and Wellbeing Board deal with will be dealt with?
Oh, right, sorry, better go with Marianne again, keep it in the same sequence.
Why don't we swap turns to make
Okay,
it
fair, yeah, fair enough. No, I think that's a very fair request. Jason, your turn.
The quick answer is yes, there is a place for the Health and Wellbeing Board in the system. I mean, the Health and Wellbeing Boards are created in statute. So for the time being, unless primary legislation changes, there will be Health and Wellbeing Boards. I think what as I mentioned when I gave my Husting speech, I think what is unclear at this stage is how the Health and Wellbeing Board and the borough Health and Care Committee and other strategic boards which have different lines of governance and different lines of accountability will be aligned or will be brought closer together. That doesn't mean to say that I don't think they will likely be merged into one board. I don't think that will happen in the foreseeable future, certainly not in the next couple of years. But I do think there will be efforts to align the type of things that go to those boards and the type of things they're looking at, because the idea is to work more collectively and more joined up as a system. And so that means that the relative boards and committees across the borough needs to be more joined up and more connected.
Thanks. Marianne?
Lilius, to be honest, I've got no idea, but the system as it looks at the moment looks like there's a lot of duplication, and duplication is never helpful because for so many reasons. So I think that I hope that there's going to be it's going to be a lot of clarity about how the system works to ensure that they're adding value, not detracting. Yeah, nobody can answer. Well, I've not heard anybody in the know answer about the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board in the future. I really hope it doesn't. I really hope that somebody thinks hard about it.
And in a way, that's why it's so important to have, very active representation at the moment, if it is formative and evolving in a changing kind of environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
June, I'm putting the finger on you because you haven't asked anything you'd like to get clarification about, or
I think
raise?
the main thing is what the board is, and it's just, for me, I'll listen to what the recording said if there's anything extra that comes out, because both Jason and Marianne are coming from not Jason's organisation is not as large as Marianne's, I suppose, but the funding comes in from the local authority, and it's just something that both of you are very similar in the way that you're funded and the way that you work. I suppose for me, from Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network is, how would either of you represent the smaller organisations that are not coming to your meetings, that you might not even be working with? How would you get there? How would you start to include them in your so that they come to your meetings and they actually then sort of have some voice around them? I know that I might come, but it's not just about me. They need to come and listen themselves. And one of the things that we do at WCN is we do things in the evening, not just during the day, because people work, most of our work is the voluntary sector, and the voluntary sector means that we're looking at volunteers, and volunteers are not all people that are not paid or have are retired or whatever. They're people that are working, and their time is the evening, which means that they can give that time, or they can do things later. So how do you try to get those people to have, how do you find what their voice is and represent them at the Health and Wellbeing Board? Because health is very important to all of us, and wellbeing as it stands.
Okay, Oh dear. Jason, you go first again, because Marianne did too first.
Okay, so first of all, as WCA, we do work a lot with small organisations. We've got, you know, we've got some programs. I mean, a lot of the work we do around capacity building and development support within the organisation is with very small voluntary sector organisations, because they're the ones that need it. The bigger organisations, you know, are pretty able to do that kind of stuff for themselves, and most of those are very small, sometimes start-up, very often BME organisations, and so we do have quite a lot of developing links with very small organisations like that. We also have strategies to work closer with small organisations that we actually learned from our State of the Sector report that we did earlier in the year, that there's a lot of focus needed on smaller organisations. So we have got strategies in place to do that actually, and bring not just for us to reach small organisations, but to bring smaller organisations of similar ilk together to support and learn and be aware of each other. So there's lots that we do. We also do work. More recently, we've been working over the last, well, we've been doing community champions type work with very small community organisations and embedded groups for the half of the year that we've just been in, and actually working in terms of COVID response and vaccination take up with very small groups over the last couple of years. So we are connected with small groups, and I either directly or indirectly through the my colleagues in the organisation get a lot of intel and feedback around small groups.
Thanks, Jason. Marianne?
I'm going to start by nicking something that Jason said earlier, which I think it's not necessarily the role of the representative to go and speak to all these individual groups and charities. Rather, it's the role of the representative to influence the health and social care systems and partners to do that, to listen and to consult and to involve and to harness and to collaborate. So to be aware of exactly what you said, June. So I would expect those groups to be doing that engagement work rather than me as rep. And you're right, June. I do lead a large organisation, but as you know, it's a very connected organisation, partly thanks to our relationship with WCEN. So through our day-to-day work, we run conferences and events with you. We do them ourselves. And we have got good connections with people like yourselves who are trusted intermediaries. I can rely on WCN to feedback on key issues. And I think the events that so our annual conferences and our 4 yearly network events, they are where, as an organisation and as a leader, I ask the community, what are your needs, what are your challenges, and also really importantly, what are your strengths, and how can we work together to harness those strengths. And I think that approach that we've developed here at Systems Advice Wandsworth, which is really knowing we can't do anything on our own and we're stronger together, it's that approach that's really led me to be interested in this role, because it allows me to kind of apply that at a higher systems level. I hope that's answered the question.
Okay, thank you.